They said Poland couldn't escape Europe's economic stagnation. The data from Q3 2025 proves them catastrophically wrong. While the EU limped to 1.5% growth, Poland surged to 3.7%. This isn't luck or temporary relief. This is the result of choices Europe refused to make, and the divergence is accelerating into 2026. The numbers tell a story Europe's leaders don't want to admit. Since 1995, Poland has doubled its real GDP, while the EU managed just 70% growth. Think about that. Nearly 30 years of steady outperformance while economists predicted the opposite. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. Poland hit $1 trillion in nominal GDP in September 2025. A country written off as perpetually behind just achieved what most of Europe thought impossible for a former Eastern Bloc nation. The contrast gets sharper when you look at Poland's neighbors. Czechia managed 2.7% growth in Q3 2025. Hungary barely scraped 1.6%, yet Poland powered through at 3.7%, leaving its regional peers in the dust alongside the broader European economy. What makes this surge even more striking is the timing. Europe faces manufacturing weakness, investment delays, and structural challenges that should have dragged Poland down with everyone else. Instead, something fundamental separated Poland from the pack. This isn't about short-term statistical noise or political spin. The European Commission forecasts Poland will grow 3.5% in 2026, while the Eurozone struggles to reach 1.2%. The OECD predicts 3.4% for Poland, marking the highest growth rate among all EU members. The divergence isn't slowing down, it's accelerating, and the mechanism driving this separation reveals everything wrong with how Europe approaches economic resilience. The question everyone's asking is simple. How does one country break away when the entire continent is stuck? The answer lies in something most economists completely missed. Poland's economic engine runs on a foundation that defied every prediction about post-communist economies. While Europe focused on complex financial instruments and monetary policy, Poland built something far more basic and far more powerful: resilient domestic demand. Here's the mechanism they missed. Polish household incomes have been rising steadily, creating a consumption base that can absorb external shocks. When manufacturing weakened across Central Europe in 2024 and 2025, Poland's families kept spending. Not because of government stimulus or artificial support, but because their paychecks were growing faster than inflation. The unemployment rate tells the real story. At 3.1%, Poland maintains nearly full employment, while much of Europe struggles with structural joblessness. This isn't just a number, it's the foundation of consumer confidence that keeps money flowing through the economy even when external conditions deteriorate. But here's where it gets interesting. Poland's current account deficit sits at just 1% of GDP. That's remarkably low for a growing economy. Most developing nations run much higher deficits to fund their expansion. Poland found a way to grow without depending on massive foreign capital inflows. The inflation rate hovers around 2.5%, right on target, not the runaway inflation that typically accompanies rapid growth in emerging markets. Not the deflationary spiral plaguing parts of the Eurozone. Steady, manageable inflation that signals healthy demand without dangerous overheating. This combination creates what economists call a virtuous cycle. Strong employment supports household spending. Household spending drives business investment. Business investment creates more jobs. The cycle reinforces itself without requiring constant government intervention or external support. Compare this to the Eurozone model. Complex monetary policies, massive stimulus programs, and still barely 1.2% growth projected for 2026. Poland achieved more than double that rate with fundamentally sound domestic economics. The Polish model proves something European leaders refuse to acknowledge. Economic resilience comes from the bottom up, not the top down. It comes from families having steady jobs and rising incomes, not from central bank interventions and fiscal gymnastics. Yet, domestic strength alone doesn't explain Poland's complete breakaway from European stagnation. The real acceleration comes from a source most analysts either ignored or actively criticized. The European Union's Recovery and Resilience Facility was supposed to help all member states rebuild after the pandemic. Most countries struggled to absorb the funds effectively. Poland turned EU money into rocket fuel for its already strong domestic engine. Here's how the timing worked. Just as Poland's household consumption provided a stable foundation, EU investments began flooding into infrastructure, technology, and industrial capacity. Instead of replacing domestic investment, EU funds amplified it. Instead of creating dependency, they accelerated independence. The RRF investments hit their peak absorption rate in 2025 and 2026, precisely when Poland's domestic economy was strongest. Perfect timing that most European nations completely missed. They either absorbed EU funds too slowly or used them to patch holes instead of building new capacity. Poland's strategic positioning created another advantage nobody predicted. While Western Europe tied itself to complex supply chains vulnerable to global disruptions, Poland built more resilient domestic and regional networks. When international trade flows stumbled, Poland's economy kept moving. The energy positioning tells part of this story. Poland diversified away from Russian energy earlier and more aggressively than most European nations. When energy shocks hit the continent, Poland faced less disruption. Lower energy costs meant more money staying in the domestic economy instead of flowing to foreign suppliers. Tech and services exports became another accelerant. While traditional manufacturing struggled across Central Europe, Poland's growing technology sector found new markets. Services exports grew, even as goods exports faced headwinds. This sectoral diversity provided stability other nations lacked. The geopolitical alignment created unexpected economic benefits. Poland's clear stance on security issues attracted investment from partners seeking stable, reliable locations. Defense spending brought technology transfers and industrial development that reinforced the broader economic foundation. Critics called Poland's strategy risky, confrontational, or unsustainable. The 2025 data proves them wrong on every count. Poland achieved exactly what its critics said was impossible: strong growth, low imbalances, and strategic independence. But the most revealing aspect of Poland's acceleration isn't what they did, it's what they didn't do. They didn't follow the European consensus on monetary policy, fiscal coordination, or industrial strategy. They built their own path when the collective approach clearly wasn't working. The combination of domestic resilience and strategic positioning created something unprecedented in modern Europe, a country that could grow independently of continental trends. Not despite EU membership, but by using EU resources more effectively than anyone else. Let that sink in. Poland took European money and European opportunities, combined them with domestic strengths Europe had forgotten how to build, and achieved what the European project itself couldn't deliver: sustained, balanced, independent growth. This isn't the end of the story. The complete divergence between Poland and the rest of Europe reveals something fundamental about economic models, policy choices, and the future of the continent itself. The implications of Poland's breakaway become clear when you look at what happens next. The European Commission forecasts show Poland maintaining 3.4% to 3.7% growth through 2026, while the Eurozone struggles at 1.2%. This isn't a temporary surge. This is a fundamental realignment of economic power within Europe. But here's what the forecasts also reveal. Poland's growth moderates to 2.8% by 2027, not because the model breaks down, but because the external accelerants naturally taper off. EU fund absorption peaks in 2026, then declines. The question becomes whether Poland's domestic engine can sustain leadership without that extra fuel. The answer depends on something most analysts are missing. Poland didn't just use EU money to grow faster. They used it to build permanent capacity that will keep generating returns long after the funds end, infrastructure that lasts decades, technology capabilities that create ongoing advantages, industrial capacity that serves both domestic and export markets. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe faces a different trajectory. The Eurozone's 1.2% growth projection for 2026 assumes no major shocks, no energy disruptions, and continued monetary support. Remove any of those assumptions and the numbers get worse. Poland built a model that doesn't require perfect external conditions. The demographic factor adds another layer most economists overlooked. While Western Europe ages rapidly and struggles with labor shortages, Poland maintained a more balanced population structure. The 3.1% unemployment rate isn't just about current jobs. It's about having working-age people available when the economy needs them. But demographics alone don't explain Poland's resilience. The real difference lies in policy choices made over the past 15 years. choices that seemed controversial or backwards at the time, but created the foundation for today's outperformance. Poland prioritized domestic energy security when others focused on cost optimization. They invested in traditional infrastructure when others chased digital transformation. They maintained industrial capacity when others shifted to services. These unglamorous decisions created the platform for sustained growth. The vindication goes deeper than economic statistics. Poland proved that a country can remain committed to European integration while refusing to follow every European consensus. They showed that strategic independence and EU membership aren't contradictory. They demonstrated that smaller nations don't have to accept permanent secondary status. The psychological impact across Europe is profound. Other Central and Eastern European nations are studying Poland's model. Western European countries are questioning their own approaches. The assumption that Brussels knows best for everyone is cracking under the weight of actual results. Yet Poland's success creates new challenges. Higher growth attracts higher expectations. Success draws attention from competitors and critics. The model that worked when Poland was underestimated faces different pressures now that everyone is watching. The sustainability question remains open. Can Poland maintain 3% plus growth when EU funds decline? Can domestic consumption keep driving expansion without external support? Can the virtuous cycle continue when global conditions inevitably change? The early indicators suggest yes, but with modifications. Poland's domestic foundations are strong enough to support 2.8% growth even without peak EU funding. That's still double the Eurozone rate. The comparative advantage remains intact, even as the absolute numbers moderate. What Poland achieved between 2023 and 2026 wasn't a miracle. It was the result of consistent policy choices, strategic timing, and refusing to follow consensus when consensus wasn't working. The model is replicable, but only for countries willing to make similar hard choices about priorities and trade-offs. The broader European implications are staggering. If one member state can achieve sustained outperformance using this approach, what does that say about the collective strategy? Poland's methods work better than the coordinated approach. Why isn't everyone copying them? The answer reveals the deepest truth about Europe's current trajectory. Change requires admitting that previous approaches failed. It requires abandoning policies that feel sophisticated for methods that actually work. It requires political courage that most European leaders currently lack. Poland's rise nobody predicted is becoming Europe's future nobody wants to discuss. A continent divided between nations that adapted and nations that didn't. Between economies that built resilience and economies that assumed stability. Between countries that took responsibility for their own success and countries that waited for collective solutions. As of January 2026, Poland leads Europe in growth, employment, and economic dynamism. The data proves what the experts said was impossible. The question now is whether the rest of Europe will learn from Poland's example or continue down the path that created this divergence in the first place. This story is far from over. Europe's economic transformation has barely begun, and Poland's model offers a roadmap other nations can't ignore much longer. If you want to understand where Europe is heading and which countries will lead the way, this is the reality you need to follow. Subscribe to stay ahead of the changes reshaping the continent. The next chapter of Europe's economic future is being written right now.